to help people, and a dialogue about life coaching, because life coaching is kind of exploding right now, about wellness, just about anything under that umbrella of self-betterment. And so we're creating a channel, and it's going to be called the Catalyst Course Coaching Collective. It's a little bit long. And it's going to be where we house all our interesting conversations, tips and all that stuff. So MC is our very first guest. And do you want to say a little bit about yourself, your journey, how we met?
Yeah, so I met John, I don't even want to think about how many years ago. I think it was 2011, which is crazy. Back when the Angry Therapist was like yeah, right?
Yeah.
Back when the Angry Therapist was just a Tumblr, and started kind of working in, and I was thinking about sort of career transitions and what I might do with my own sort of academic background in philosophy and psychology. And so started working with John then, and then worked with him to develop the first Catalyst course, and have been life coaching since, I don't even know, 2012 maybe. So yeah.
And you're also a professor?
Yes, I'm a professor of philosophy in Virginia.
Yes. So I always say I'm kind of like the first domino, in that I did technically create the course, like, out of my kitchen, because I thought I'm a licensed therapist, and then going through that journey, I just thought there were problems with it, and I thought there was better ways to teach people how to help people. So, but that being said, there's a lot of pieces that's required for this course to happen. Noel and so MC is one of our instructors, and so I want to try to interview like everyone who's a part of the course, but also some students and stuff. And I think from that we're going to get a lot of rich, interesting dialogue.
Cool.
So we're going to talk about trauma today, and so MC teaches the course on trauma, and trauma is really interesting. I want to first kind of like, let's define what trauma is. So what is trauma?
So the definition that I always like to work from, and this is a little bit different than the definition that sort of the formal psychologists use, and I do that on purpose, and that's sort of unbearable affect that lacks relational home. So again, that can sound a little jargony, like what does that actually mean? So affect is just emotion, so unbearable emotional experience that you can't find anyone to really totally relate to about that. Right. So I think that a lot of our regular life experience get processed through dialogue with other people, and when we have a situation that we can't really work out in dialogue for whatever reason, just because it's too overwhelming, or it makes us feel isolated, or we don't know other people who've been through that event, that I think that's what trauma is. So
I think a lot of people, when they hear the word trauma, they think of war vets, or they think of sexual abuse, but
plane crash. Yeah,
exactly. But is it true that everyone has some form of trauma? All right, if you've been through shit.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. If we think about unbearable, I think that all of our, the things that we go through and experience, I think impacts the way that we behave and treat other people. You think about past relationships and how those impact the way that you engage in relationships now. That's just unavoidable. That's part of being human. And I think that we are all bound to run into something that makes us struggle. And makes us feel isolated, that we have a really hard time working through. So I'm of the mind that I don't think we all have PTSD, like in the clinical sense, but I think that we all are exposed to some level of trauma and deal with it in a variety of different ways.
So how would you start dealing with trauma? I mean, besides seeing a coach like yourself at home, and if they feel like they don't have PTSD, but they just went through like a crazy, breakup or something, and they feel that, there's, they don't have, I forgot what your definition was, with the housing for
like a relational home, someone to relate to with it. Yeah. I think that the first thing to realize is that no matter how alone you feel in your experience, no matter how weird it seems or different it seems from anyone else's experience around you, that you're not alone in whatever it is your experience and whatever you've been traumatized. And people are traumatized by all sorts of things. So one of the things I think that's detrimental about the view of trauma that looks only at war or sexual assault victims is what happens when you have that experience and it's something that seems like a lot smaller, like you have a bad work dynamic, that can be traumatic. And so I think the first step is kind of realizing that it's there and that it's impacting your life in some negative sense. And then the second thing is that you're not alone in it. And I think with Shift and all of these online spaces, you will be able to find people who can understand and relate to what you're going through no matter what it is. And then the next step, I think, is to connect. So get a coach, get a support group, get a tribe, get a group of people, even if it's 2 or 3 people who've been through the same thing, who can help you through that a little bit or help you start to process it.
Why were you attracted to the topic of trauma? How did you get interested in like that world?
So it's funny. It was kind of like a weird, it wasn't anything that I really intended on doing. I've always been interested in human psychology and the way people work and how we are impacted by the things that happen to us. I personally have had a lot of loss in my life. I've lost some friends when they were really young, and then both my parents passed away when they were young and very quickly. And so that plus sort of what I was looking at in philosophy, which was I was looking at self-identity and issues with self-identity. And then I was also kind of watching the news, and I have some friends who are in the military, and I just kept seeing these headlines about veterans who couldn't find anyone to talk to and didn't feel like they could live with, what it means to come home from war. And I just started thinking, like, there's got to be a better way to deal with this. Mm-hmm. What's going on? What are we currently doing about trauma? What does it mean? How do people understand it? What are the things that are working? What are the things that don't work? And I just sort of fell down a rabbit hole for the last 6 years or so.
Yeah, no, absolutely. What are some interesting things about trauma? And it's also something that they're, constantly learning new things about, right?
Oh yeah, totally.
So in your experience, your journey with it, what are some things that you've learned about trauma that, a lot of people may not know, or they may not realize, or the things that revelations you've had about trauma that, that you didn't know before?
Okay. So one of the biggest, I think, revelations that I've had about it is that we're not always aware of what has traumatized us. Mm-hmm. And even as someone who, I always talk about this when I teach the Catalyst course, even as someone who studies trauma, like, who of what, what would be traumatic. But as I was kind of writing one of the workbooks in the early stages of the Catalyst course, I kind of discovered that there was traumatic experience that I had lived through and hadn't processed, because I didn't even see it as traumatic. So we have this idea that, like, everyone comes into therapy and you're like, okay, I have, this is my problem and this is what I want to do and this is the goal. And sometimes it's a lot more amorphous than that. You just realize that you don't have a great way to relate to people, or your personal relationships aren't satisfying, or there's something there. And I think sometimes it can take a little digging to find and realize that there is trauma. And sometimes that's all it takes. Like, sometimes you just need that experience validated by someone else, and then you can kind of move on and be happy about it, or not happy that it happened, but see the role that it has in your life, and how it's made you as the person you are now, and turn it into a more positive experience. I think the field of trauma studies is unfolding, like, minute by minute. I was just at a conference this last weekend about science and technology, and the way that science and technology is changing the field of trauma studies and the way that we understand what's going on. So we used to think of it as like a psychological problem only. It's something that happens in your mind, and that is in some sense your fault. What we're realizing, the more we know about brain imaging and things like that, is that it's also, there's a really strong biological component and there's a body component. So it's not about just going to therapy and just finding someone to talk to about. It's also about learning how to come home to your own body and feel safe in your own, like, physical container, being your body. So there's a lot of stuff that's very helpful for processing trauma that doesn't involve sitting in a room and talking it out, but more, doing CrossFit or doing yoga, dance, things like that.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting. So I like this idea that, because people are used to just the couch and conversations, but this new way of approaching things. So like this connection with your body. And I know you mentioned yoga, and I feel like you mentioned CrossFit just because you think that I'm gonna like CrossFit, but
no, it's a huge outlet for veterans, for military people. I know we talked about this.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's amazing, and I think that that kind of goes in line with everything that's happening now in wellness. So it, mind, body, soul thing instead of books, things that are outside of ourselves. This idea of reconnecting to you,
and also that you want to create a toolbox that helps you cope, that has a bunch of different tools. If you had a tool that just had a hammer, you wouldn't be able to do a lot of building, right? So you need a lot of different tools. This was the paper that I gave at the conference, was about how whenever we have any kind of problem, we want a silver bullet. We want one singular cure. Like, this is what I'm going to do, and it's going to be gone. But we are dynamic, holistic people, and we need dynamic, holistic help, right? So, I think learning how to treat yourself in a bunch of different ways simultaneously can be super empowering, because you realize that, on a day or a month when you don't feel like you can't talk about it, you can do a bunch of stuff, in your body that can also help, right? So I think it can help us a lot the more we think holistically about cures and treatments.
Do you find that there's a difference between genders as far as what men think about trauma, how they deal with it, and women?
Yeah, I think that because of the way we look, I'm teaching a class right now on gender and the way that it changes our self-identity, and I think it's really fascinating the way, like, we start gendering ourselves and like performing gender in a way when we're like infants. Like, our parents start to put that on us, and we are told over and over again that there's like a certain way that you can react as a man or as a woman. And I think that one of the really detrimental things, at least in the military population, is that men aren't, they're not allowed to have emotional response. So if you have any kind of mental struggle, if you have anxiety or depression or PTSD, it's seen as a weakness, right? And I think that, especially in the case of PTSD, I think this is true of any mental illness as well, but or disorder, I think it's actually a sign of strength, not a sign of weakness. Mm-hmm. But since our society doesn't see it that way, then men in particular get like really marginalized because they're not allowed to talk about their experience, or, it's all about like man up and stop being a wimp, and I think women are silenced in different ways. There's a lot of stuff around like sexual assault, shame and sexual assault and victim blaming and things like that I think are really pervasive in society and not necessarily conscious. So I think that's really hard to deal with, because there's not really a good way to combat something like that.
Yeah. What would be, I want to be sensitive with your time, what would be 3 takeaways that someone watching this video can leave with, that you want to give them to leave with, that is really important when it comes to trauma, or how to heal from trauma, etc.?
Okay, 3 takeaways. I think the first most important thing is that we all have it.
Yeah.
We all have baggage. We all have things that trigger us. We all have stuff that we have to work through. I think that's part of what it means to be human. I think that's actually an exciting part of being human. If we didn't have anything to work on, we'd be really bored. Right. So that's number 1. We all have it. You're not alone. This is related to the second thing. You're not alone in it. There is someone out there who understands what you have been through, even if they haven't been through it themselves. I think we can connect with people. And that feeling when someone just gets it. Like, there are people who get it. So even if you feel alone, you're not alone. It just sometimes takes a little time to find your people.
Yeah. Can I just say real quick? Also, not only have we all been through some form of trauma, but the word trauma, I think, it's like loaded. It's like the word divorce, or it's like, I think people, when they feel that they've been through something traumatic, they label themselves, and now
Yeah.
they are defective, or they are broken, or they are weak, or all that stuff. And I think it's really important to like pull that label off, and to see trauma and not in a negative, something horrific happened to me kind of way. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
redefining it that way.
Right. As just, we all get colds. Nobody
Yeah.
would like shame each other for that. We all have rough times. Nobody should shame each other for that, and that relates to the third thing, which is this idea of post-traumatic growth, which is a new thing, a relatively new thing that people are talking about, which is neuroscientists and psychiatrists and psychologists and trauma theorists are looking at the ways that people have tremendous amounts of growth after trauma. So we tend to think when we're in sort of the dark moment that the trauma is the beginning of the end. It's our dark, like, night of the soul, and that's going to be it, that this is it for us. But what they found over and over and over again is after trauma comes incredible growth and progress. And so I always like to think about, there's that Japanese art called kintsugi, which is I don't know when this started historically, but they used to, when they broke ceramic bowls, they would lacquer them together with gold lacquer, and just because they wanted the things that were broken to be pretty, and they wanted to use the things that they broke, right? So purely like a functional issue. And then those things that were broken, because they had this gold lacquer, became more valuable to society than the things that had never been broken. And I think that we should think about trauma that way, right? Like, if you are feeling broken down by something, then that means that there's not only incredible growth ahead of you, but also more value and more beauty. You'll understand the human experience more deeply, be able to connect with people more deeply, and you'll be a different person in a good way, not a bad way.
I love that, and I love that visual, and I wanna get one of those.
Yeah.
Put it on my mantle. I love that idea. Also, isn't it true that people that have been through a lot of trauma actually have more capacity to be empathetic?
Yeah, completely.
Right.
Yep. And there's even like brain scans on that. So that's not just like something that people say to make us feel better when we're feeling down, but there's actual science behind that.
Yeah. So that's amazing. I mean,
Yeah.
that's a gift, and I would want my friends or intimate partner to have that kind of high capacity.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's another one sort of last thing is that when you're in the moment where it feels like you're drowning in the darkness, I think helping someone else with their trauma can be super empowering, because you see that you're capable and needed, and it highlights that you're more empathetic and capable than you might have been before.
Okay. So if you want to take a step toward healing, if you discovered that you do have some form of trauma and it's affecting your life, or maybe you've always known that you've had trauma, but now you're kind of ready to heal from it, what do you do?
I mean, look us up. Start a conversation, get it out there, connect with people online in the tiniest ways. Start getting out there. And I know how scary that can be to kind of share your story. So be gentle with yourself as you do it. But I've seen so many people time and time again. And this isn't just like, I'm not trying to just have like an ad about Shift here, but like post on the Shift page and like instantaneously get comments back. I know what you're going through. I've been through this. This is what worked for me. This is what didn't. And just that feeling of connection, I think, can be enormously therapeutic.
Yeah.
So I think the first step is to don't allow yourself to get locked up in it.
Yeah. And it goes also with everything that the flag that I'm waving, which is we're not meant to do this alone, and that we rebuild ourselves through others. So guys, all the links will be on the bottom on the info page of this YouTube page. And MC, thank you so much for hanging out with us this morning, or me.
Of course. Thank you.
And I will see you in class.
Okay. Sounds good.
Be well.
Bye, you too.